Hello and welcome to another edition of Addition. I'm your host, Addy Snowden. I'm a big tech product manager, futurist, tech optimist, artist, and creator. And today I'm bringing you a surprise interview. Today we have Jonaed Iqbal, and I'm so excited to introduce him to you all. So, Jonaed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited. It's been several years. Clubhouse days is where we met.
Yes, Clubhouse days. I still continue to run into Clubhouse people, and we got to meet in person
Yep,
in maybe last year when you were visiting for Render, right?
yep, yep. And it's so cool. That's the beauty of online networking, right? You meet someone and then you're like, I was like, hey, that looks like Addy.
Yep,
And I was like,
yep.
you know what? I gotta at least ask. And thankfully it wasn't an awkward, like, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like I will recognize that profile picture all the time. So the power of the profile pic. All right, so Junaid, you're a very impressive man. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the
Yeah.
audience?
So I'm the founder of NoDegree.com, a career resource for people without college degrees. And I host a No Degree podcast where I interview people without college degrees and have them share their story. So my life's mission is to remove the stigma attached to people without college degrees and to make the workplace more accessible to people without college degrees.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to hear more and share more about your business with the audience. And so we kind of talked about how we met. So we talked about we met on Clubhouse, and I believe it was in a futurist room. Is that correct?
I don't think it was the futures. It was something about careers. And I think it wasn't your usual clubhouse room. I think you were just hanging out and it was about
Ah,
career talks. And then you mentioned something like, hey, I got to become a software engineer if I want to break six figures. And I was
yes.
like, hey, that's not accurate. I write resumes. And I was like, you know what, send me your resume. You can get something more than six figures. You just have to sell yourself properly, and you have to kind of know of the opportunities out there, because oftentimes I come across so many people who are working very hard but they're underpaid, and they
Yeah.
think like, you know what, this is all this field pays, but oftentimes that's all that you knew at the time. And then once you kind of learn about all these other opportunities, that I know that you're making so much more than you were now.
Yes, maybe, but yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you remembered our origin story because, we've it took you were my resume guy, like
Yeah.
you approved my resume to submit to Microsoft, which got me into big tech for the first time. Like I'm incredibly grateful to you sharing your mission and, empowering people to, believe that they can have these high-powered, high-paying jobs and they don't need to be software engineers. So, so you have so you're encouraging people without degrees. You're also an ATS expert. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so I write resumes professionally. I've written over 700 resumes where I've spent anywhere from 2 to 3 hours at least on each resume. I've done resumes for people from the high school level all the way to like the C-suite. So I've kind of seen it all. And a lot of times you'll see resumes online and they'll say this ATS friendly resume, this resume is ATS approved. But here's the thing: different applicant tracking systems, that's what an ATS is, work differently. Some are more advanced than others. Some are very bare bones. So anytime I see someone giving ATS advice, I always look at the format they're sharing, and the format should be very simple and clean, because anybody who works with data kind of understands, like, if your resume is not autofilling correctly, these are some signs that your resume isn't ATS friendly. But the easiest thing to say is you should have no underlines, italics, none of that fancy stuff, no pictures and all that. The the other aspect is you need to sell yourself well. People need to look at a resume as a sales document. Too many people
100%.
just list it as like, hey, here's what I did, but it's like they're not hiring you for what you, like, the basic things you did. Like, people will say, hey, I'm a recruiter, and they'll just put the basic job description. It's like they know that you're a recruiter. What makes you a good recruiter? So a resume should show what makes you good, what makes you better than other people, what makes you unique.
Absolutely. No, you have amazing resume tips. I think they're still saved on my phone as notes, like some bullets that you shared. And I was like just sharing those bullets and I'll include them in the show notes. And I'll also link your LinkedIn, your website in the show notes so people can reach out to you because when I say this guy empowered me to get into Microsoft. I'm not lying. It's super true. I still use your resume format, and I help others with your resume format as well, which is amazing. Okay, so that being said, so you have a podcast. You encourage people without degrees and are working to change the system and reduce the stigma of people without degrees. But you have a degree. You have multiple degrees. So we have to talk about your educational background and your career story, because that's one thing that we bonded over because we're both mathematicians.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have a master in actuarial science from Columbia University. And it feeds into no
Unfortunately.
yeah, it's just like if I were to do it, I would do it very differently. Like I'm an immigrant, and so immigrant parents and Ivy League degrees, it's just one of those things that I really got it for my parents. It wasn't necessarily for myself to make them happy, but they're still not happy. So it's one of those things that if you're ever getting a degree for your parents, the type of parents that like that, there's always someone who's a doctor, better degree, who has a PhD. So you have to make sure that if you're ever pursuing education, I'm not anti-education. I just think that people have to make the decision that is right for them. And when I went to Columbia, this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. A lot of the people who go to the Ivy League schools, like 80% of them came from very wealthy backgrounds. I think if you look at the stats, and even for regular schools, 60% of people come from middle-class backgrounds or higher, because you need that support system. College is tough if you have to pay rent, you have to do all that. The people who tend to do the best are the people who they can just study all the time, they can just focus, they can participate on campus, not the people who have to like work 40 hours a week. So that's something that I learned. And even at Columbia, a lot of them were very good students, and school came naturally to a lot of people. So when I studied and all that stuff, and when I was an undergrad, there were people who studied harder than me, they studied more than me, but I did better than them. Because why? I was just a better student. But that doesn't mean that there weren't other areas that would take me longer. Like if you asked me to pick up drawing or something creative, I'm not as good as that, and it would take me much longer. So I think like everybody needs to be judged differently, because some people are good in the classroom, some people are good at creativity, some people are good at projects, some people are good at other things. And just because someone's not good in the classroom does not mean they're not going to be great at work.
Absolutely. I was just getting my hair done and talking to my hairstylist about people who are coming in straight out of hair school and think that they're qualified because they have their certification. And she said something very profound. A certification just means you finish something. That's all a degree means. It just means you finish something. It doesn't say anything about your tenacity. It doesn't say anything about how you finished it. I also went to an Ivy League school. A lot of people had full-time tutors. There's a whole system on how to get the degree and a certain GPA that you have.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't talk about the tutors. These tutors are like $100 to $300 an hour. And I don't know about you, but I could not afford $100 to $300 an hour. My parents could not afford that. And I was actually talking to someone, and he mentioned that there was a college coach in their area who's really good, but she charges $55,000 upfront, like to work with her. So it's like it's inaccessible for a lot of people. And that's why I respect anybody who doesn't come from a privileged background who gets into Ivy League. Like, you have to work 10 times harder, right? You did not have the coaches or the support system. So I'm all about like, hey, not everyone has access to these things, because it's much tougher to go back to school in your later age. So there should be more ways for people to break into careers that don't necessarily require college. And now more than ever, there's so many online classes, there are boot camps, mentorship. So there are so many more ways to break in. And in my opinion, they're just as valid as any other way.
100%. And we're going to get into that in a minute. More, because I really want to hear more about how, your message for people without degrees, how to get, the high-powered six-figure job. So I have another question about your education. So you chose actuarial science for your master's.
Yeah.
Did you work as an actuary at any point?
Yeah, I worked as an actuary for like, I was technically an actuarial assistant. You're not officially an actuary till you pass 5 exams.
Yeah.
So around 2000, like 10 to like 2015, 2016, maybe even 2017, if you looked at the top jobs, actuary was always like number one. It was always on the top 5, top 10 list. And I'm going to tell you, these lists are very deceiving because a lot of the journalists who make these lists, all they do is Google other things and they Google other resources. But these lists are not made by actual career experts who see it, because I'm going to tell you why it's not a good career. I actually don't tell people to become actuaries. I tell people to become data scientists or software engineers instead, because to be an actuary, you have to pass, if you want to be a full-fledged actuary, it's about 8 exams. Each exam can take anywhere from 100 to 300 hours worth of studying, and the later exams take 300 to 500 hours of studying. So if you're a super genius, maybe you could pass them with like 500 hours of studying, all of them, but that's a super genius. For most people, you'll take between all the exams, like 1,000 to 2,000 plus hours throughout your career to pass all of them. And it could take 5 to 8 years after work. Now, imagine you're putting those 2,000 hours into data science or software engineer. You're going to be a very good software engineer or data scientist, and you're going to make a lot of money. Like, I know people who passed all their exams and they're making like 130 to 160. Now, while that's a great salary, if you put that time to data science, you're going to make double, triple, or even quadruple that amount.
Absolutely. Like I majored in math because I wanted to be an actuary, and then I got matched with a grad student buddy who was in grad school, was already an actuary trying to pivot into investment banking. And I'm like, okay, well, something's not right here. Okay, so after you left actuarying, like how did you get to where you're at now? Like just a brief history on your career journey.
Yeah. So 10 years ago, that's when I found nodegree.com. So as I was interning for MetLife, I found nodegree.com. And so my plan was, hey, I can't do a business and be an actuary because you have to study hundreds of hours for these exams. So I was like, instead of spending hundreds of hours for exams, I can spend hundreds of hours into my career. Then I was like, all right, I need a regular job where at least outside of work, I can focus on my business. So then I got a data analyst job. Then eventually I got a product manager job. And it just came to a point where I was like, there's so much I want to do for my business. I'm in a privileged situation where I get to live at home. So I quit my job to focus on my business full time. And through that, it just put me in so many different directions. Like I learned marketing, I learned SEO, I learned networking, I learned resume writing, and I just kept on learning things for my business.
Yeah, and it shows. I was checking out your website recently, and I mean, it is top notch, top of the line. Like, it's, I just love how you set it up, and I've also seen the growth over the, past 4 or 5 years. So, you kind of briefly talked about No Degree, but what would you like people to know on this podcast about No Degree, and also why this is deeply important to you?
Yeah, just because I come across people all the time, and job seeking, you've been through it yourself. It's tough, right? Getting that first big job. Once you get that first big job, things are a lot easier. But before you get the Microsoft, Google, is so hard. And it's hard for people with advanced degrees who went to the Ivy League. So imagine if you don't have a degree, how do you break into an Amazon? How do you break into a Google? You don't have the same opportunities, and people perceive you a certain way. And then the other thing is college is just so expensive, and it's kind of unfair because it's not like the professors are getting rich. That money is going to the campus and it's kind of going to administration. So for me, I think people should be judged based on who they are, not just on where'd you go to school, what was your GPA, and what'd you do. I think I come across so many brilliant people who did not go to school, but they still value education and learning. And I find that colleges are in the business of education. And that's why they keep on charging exorbitant amounts. Like, it's crazy that now, like, these degrees are costing 60 to 100K a year. The same degrees like 20 years ago were significantly cheaper. So, these colleges, they're just catering. They just keep on charging more and more. And it puts people in bad positions, especially as salaries haven't kept up.
Absolutely. I mean, student loans are, people say student loans are why millennials or even Gen Z are delaying life stages and, holding people back financially. So I'm glad that you have made this your platform and have stand by it. It's really amazing. So how about we get into some advice? You mentioned about how hard it is to be a job seeker. I mean, every day I get a message from someone who's like, oh my gosh, I just got laid off. Like, can can I talk to you about Google? And I'm like, that's, I'm like, I can submit you for a referral, but it's hard out here, you know,
Yeah.
it's really, so what advice would you give to these job seekers?
So first, someone should not be reaching out to you when they get laid off. They should build a relationship well before they get laid off, because so many job seekers, and I interact, I've done over 100 resumes for free. A lot of job seekers are transactional, and you probably helped a lot of people for free. And I've seen this happen way too many times. Like, people will get their job and they'll never talk to you again. And I've had instances where I've helped people for free. And then when I reach out, because I'm like, hey, I know someone else, can I give you, they want an intro to you, they don't answer. So enough people get burned that people start being protective of their networks, in that, yeah, you could submit the referral, but you look, I've gotten referrals to Google from my friends, and she said it's so tough out here that she will message the hiring manager with the Google email and still not get a response. So it's one of those things that, you know, a referral is only the baseline at a big company like Google. At smaller companies and startups, you'll go far. So what I say is, you always have to make sure you're ready for opportunity. Because here's the thing about opportunity. It's not going to be like, hey, Addy, opportunity is going to knock on your door on August 15th. Make sure you're ready. What's going to happen is you're going to get caught off guard, and you have to be ready. So I always tell people, have your achievements ready. Make sure you know what you want to do in your career. Make sure you're at least somewhat interview ready, that you're not going to have to wait a week to push back this opportunity. So I say, make sure you do your research of, you know, what you want for your resume. And you have to think ahead. Like, I did a resume for a CFO, and she said, I'm not looking for opportunity for 2 years, but I want to be ready in case something comes in handy. And then she mentioned how she was talking to me, and she said she got a promotion at her company, and she said they looked at her LinkedIn profile, but since she was ready. So I tell people, you have to be ready. You have to plan your career 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. And the relationships you build, they take time to nurture. Like, my friend who gives me referrals at Google, I helped her get the job at Google, and I knew her a year before she got the job. And anytime she asked me for things, I was there supporting her. I met her in person. I've helped her husband. So it's one of those things, you really have to nurture and build your network so that you can get these opportunities. Because again, when times get hard, you also don't want to be the person that just tells your boss, hey, I have a referral. You have a limited amount of social capital, that you want to make sure that if you're putting your name out there, that you're not just attaching it to anyone, you're attaching it to someone that you know and trust, and that's going to make you look good.
Absolutely. That's excellent advice. Relationships take so long to build, and transactional referrals don't feel good to anybody. So I'm glad that you highlighted that. So what about a job seeker, like your typical no degree audience? You know, maybe they're a retail store manager and they want to break into tech, or they want to, you know, get a corporate desk job. Like, what advice, how does your advice differ for that?
So
no degree?
Here's the thing. So I'm going to push back a little. You said typical no degree person. So I want to say that there's no typical no degree person, because
that's true.
You know, like, people think like, what's your advice to job seekers? And I tell people it varies, because there are people in retail who are good in sales. There are people who work in operations. There are people who work in customer support. There are people who work with some technical support. So first you have to realize, what experience do I have, and what does that experience go to? So there's some people in retail, they can move on to sales, and then you can look into tech sales. Now, if I'm in retail and I want to break into sales, I'm going to look into a tech sales company that sells retail solutions to retail stores, that sells tech solutions to retail stores. And that's one way in, because when you're breaking in and you're a career transition, a lot of people want to throw their background away. But the fact is, you don't have to throw your background away, and you don't have to start from zero. That since you've worked in retail and you know these customers, you know who to talk to, you know who to do outreach to, you know their language, you can reach out. So first, if you're going down the sales route, try to see some solution that works with that. Then there's the other aspect of marketing. Now it's like, hey, okay, you want to work in marketing. Maybe you're a company that helps a consumer product market. Maybe you're a company that helps small stores market. That's another way. Now, customer support, you can use that to get into customer success. And customer success is a hybrid of customer service and sales, where you have to deal with upselling. And again, sometimes in those tech companies that have these solutions for these retail companies, you can work in customer success. Then there's the more technical stuff. that you may want to get into help desk. That's one of the easier ways. Now, just realize that a lot of people keep these jobs for 6 months to a year before they upskill. But you have to think about where you can fill the gap. In tech, you're like, are you going to move into cloud? Are you going to move into cybersecurity? Are you going to move into software engineering? Software engineering, there's front end, back end. Are you going to move into data? And just realize that these transitions, first, you'll have to get an entry-level role, and you have to keep upskilling throughout your job. Just like there was a time you could break into data engineering directly, but now since the market's so competitive, you have to move to a data analyst role, work that a few years, and then you could branch off to a data science or data engineering role. But just realize that these are multi-year transitions. So that's your version of college. That's your version of, here's my 2 to 4 years of work that I'm going to put in outside of work. But just realize that it will pay off.
That's excellent advice. I think for some people, especially if they didn't finish college, they think education stops after you finish school, when we're always in full-time university, like, YouTube University, AI chatbot university,
Yeah.
like we have to keep learning. So I 100% agree with all of that. So you mentioned the job market has changed a little bit. What should job seekers expect?
Longer times for transitions. Like there was a time you could do a boot camp, 3-month boot camp, you'll get a 6-figure software engineering job. That was actually feasible. Or you'd get something in the 70 to 100K range. Now you got to look at a transition of 6 months to a year, that even people with degrees, I tell them, you may have to put 3 to 6 months of additional work. So these 3-month boot camps are not going to cut it. You need to take on additional work for another 3 to 6 months. So I've seen transitions take like a year now, because you have to do serious projects. I've even seen people, again, these are people without degrees, they have to volunteer unpaid for 3 to 6 months. Now, look, I wish people didn't have to do that. But the fact is, if you're competing with people who have internships and all that, you have to break in somehow. So the beauty of some of these volunteer opportunities, you don't have to volunteer 40 hours a week. You may volunteer maybe 10 to 15 hours. When you put it on your resume, you don't have to say full-time or part-time. If they ask, you can be honest, but you can just go ahead. But that's how you have to break in now. Like you have to put in that extra work. For example, for a lot of people in marketing, you don't have a degree, you want to break into marketing. What you have to do is approach your local restaurant. Just say, hey, I really love your restaurant. I'm trying to break in. I would love for you to help. I would love to help your restaurant get more business. I'll take care of things. And through that, you're going to learn about marketing. You can help with their Instagram page. You can help with their TikTok page. And then you could even do something like, hey, can we work out a commission-only structure where any links I get a few percent? But you have to do those extra things. And if you're a website developer, offer to create a website for them. Be like, hey, I'll do a website for free at no charge. Is that something you want to be interested in? But you have to take that initiative more than ever.
Absolutely. It doesn't sound fun or appealing, but that's just the market that we're in right now. And I always say the person who wants a job the most gets it. And the person who wants a job the most is willing to do volunteer work, unpaid. I mean, this podcast is unpaid, like we're building our brand, so people who are willing to do the extra work will always get the benefits from it, even if it's in the long term.
You know what's not fun? Having the same job with no upward growth mobility. Like I've seen people who are like, hey, I don't want to put in the work, and 4 or 5 years they're in the same job. They're like, hey, I'm not going to break 50K, or if they want to break, they have to wait for someone else to retire or all that. And that's, trust me, that's way less fun than putting some extra work in.
100%, 100%. Okay, so I know another thing you're passionate about is side hustles, and encouraging side hustles. And so what advice do you have? I know you want to deep dive on maybe some mistakes side hustlers are doing, but just give me the whole side hustle story.
So I'll share the mistakes I've made so that other people can learn from them. So the resumes is something that I started. And now I charge anywhere from 100 to 200 an hour. I average out for my resume stuff. And I'll tell you, it's not as good as you think it is. Because people think like, oh, I'm making $100 an hour, I'm making $200 an hour. A lot of people don't realize you're not making that for 8 hours a day. You're not making that for 6 hours a day. For most people to get that $100 or $200 an hour, you have to spend time marketing, you have to spend time networking, you have to spend time creating content, you have to spend some time putting yourself out there. So what I always tell people is, if you go on YouTube, you go on TikTok, they're like, hey, I have this side hustle where I'm making 10, 20K a month. It's so easy, few hours a day. And their job is to sell you the dream of side hustling, right? They're there to sell you a course. They're there to sell you a community. Now, I'm not saying that they can't be valuable, but just realize that they are selling you a dream, because that's what's going to work. Think about this. If I'm on TikTok, I'm like, hey, a side hustle is hard. It's going to take you some time. It may take 2 to 3 years before you can make it full time. You're going to have to give up nights and weekends. Here's the reality, right? I'll get like a whopping 15 likes. Now, if I'm like, hey, here's a side hustle, you want to make $500,000 in your first year, I'm going to get so many likes, right? It's just the nature of social media. So what I tell people is, when you're doing a side hustle, if you're making, let's say you're averaging $200 an hour, you're truly making $50 to $100 an hour, because you have to account that you're not going to be making this work all the time. You have to count the extra work around it, that maybe you have to spend 30 minutes prepping for that client call. For example, my nephew just got his first gig, and he got like this little birthday party for $300, 16 years old. And I told him, I was like, hey, that's really good, but let's break it down. Okay, so you were there for 6 hours. You took like 30 minutes to get there, 30 minutes to get back. So you're physically there 7 hours. And I was like, how many photos are you going to give them? He's like, 240. And he's like, it takes like 4 to 5 minutes to edit each. So I was like, hey, you're going to put 25 hours of work into it, to like maybe 20 hours. So your total time is like around 25 hours. So I said, look, at your age, it's still good because you're young, you're getting your name out there. But if you're a professional, it's not good. That's why it's like people are like, hey, I want this headshot photographer. Oh, you charge $200. Oh, I'd rather just do $100. But they don't realize, like, hey, if someone's taking headshots, they may spend 2 hours. They have to set up their camera. They have to pack. So then it's like 4 hours. And then they have to go edit. So it's like a full day, right? It may be 8 hours to make this thing. And 8 hours to make $200 is not as good. You may as well just upskill. So you really have to think about these things as a side hustle. Now, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard for some people to put value on their time. So I'm glad that you doubled down on that, because our time is valuable, and it's not just the actual project; it's what's happening before and after.
Yeah.
So glad to hear you talk about that.
Also, what did it take to get you that project? Did you have to post on social media? Did they find you on that? Did you find you through a referral? So did you have to network? So you really have to think about, how do you get these sales? Did you have to pay for Google ads? Did you have to pay for Facebook ads and all that? Now, the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is sometimes some things are better off as side hustles and not full time. Because let's say photographer, right? You're a photographer. To be a full-time photographer, you may not get enough gigs to sustain you full time, but you may sustain yourself on the weekends, nights and weekends. So you really have to think about it. It's like, do you have a sales process? Do you have something that you can get steady gigs? When you are full time and you're doing it on the side, I tell people, keep doing it, keep saving money, keep getting equipment, because once you're full time, I'm going to use photographer as an example. You're always upgrading your gear. You're upgrading your camera. So let's say you're getting, I'm going to get 3K. I'm going to get 5K for this gig. Oh, but you have to buy 2 lenses, and the lenses cost 2K. Whereas if you are doing it as a side hustle, you can take that 5K gig. You can upgrade without worrying about whether or not you can pay your bills. So what I always tell people, when you're working on a side hustle, make sure that you spend your time pumping money back into the business, upgrading yourself, saving. What I had wished I had done, I quit my job in August of 2018. That's 6 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I didn't make money for 15 months.
Wow.
I was like helping people move. I was doing all types of odd stuff to sort of make money. And I got into a little debt because of that. I started making money in 2019 in November. I did my first paid resume, and it's because I was networking with someone on LinkedIn who told me. And then I started doing resumes, and I started at 300. No, I started at like 100. Then I went to like 200. I quickly went to 297, and I was spending about 4 to 5 hours with people, sometimes even 6 hours. And then I raised my prices. I got it to 450. I got it to 500. I got it to 600. 800. Now for most people, I'm like 700 to 1200 for 5 to 6 hours. I would have gotten there quicker had I had a full-time job, because when you need the money to survive, and one thing that I'll tell you, like, since I'm in the career-based industry, I don't negotiate. I'll give people a fair price, but I don't negotiate because I learned from a friend of mine. He was like, look, if you negotiate, people who are looking for discounts, they're looking to discount themselves. And that means they don't truly value you. And especially when it comes to careers, and I've seen it, like the people who look for discounts, they're the ones who are like, not well, they think they're going to get a magic bullet. And while I help people, like I helped you with your resume, but I didn't interview for you. I gave you the guidance, but you showed up, you prepped, you wowed them, right? So I am a catalyst, but I'm not doing everything. I can't handhold someone throughout the process. So, since I depended on the money, there were times like I wanted to charge more, but I was like, I don't want to lose the deal because I need this money to survive. And at 2 points while having this, I got a job. And every time I got a job, I raised my prices. And even though I raised my prices, I got the same amount of business. I didn't lose it, but I could not afford. So you have to put yourself where you have a cushion where you're not going to run into issues. And I wish I had saved a lot more money before quitting my job and doing it full time.
Yeah, well, that's a really powerful story, and a story more people need to hear. As you mentioned, people are just sharing stuff on Instagram and TikTok to get views and engagement. They don't care. They're not invested in the well-being of the people who are listening to their advice. So it's really rare to meet people like you who, do care about your audience. So I'm glad you're sharing this with people.
Yeah, because can I add one more thing? Because it's the behind the scenes. A lot of side hustlers don't talk about they may be subsidized by their parents. Like I'll tell people I lived at home. So that allowed me. If I didn't live at home, I would not have quit my job. So a lot of them are subsidized by their spouses because they may be on their spouses or significant others' health insurance. All these other things that they don't talk about. Like you never hear a side hustler talk about like, hey, I make 10, 20,000 a month. Now, if you have a family, you have kids, that health insurance, like you're making 10K. Okay, you may be dropping 2K on health insurance. And so these are things like that people don't talk about. Like you have to be very mindful of it. So I tell people try to save like 6 months to even a year. And if you have a spouse that supports you, that's a totally different story. But just realize that a lot of people who are in side hustles look at their actual story and just realize that a lot of them are only sharing the parts that help them look good and are not sharing the actual true details of the hardships and what enabled them to do what they do.
Absolutely. Myth busting. So another thing that I'm really impressed by with you is like you were one of the first LinkedIn influencers before everyone got the ability to be a creator, and we met on a social platform. I see you on TikTok. Like you're fully dived into the marketing. So I'd love to talk about how that has been for you getting into social. What you've mentioned, you learned a lot about marketing over the years. So what's it like being a creator influencer?
Yeah. So creator is tough. Let me tell you, these platforms are not your friends. They can help you, but just realize that these platforms are always changing. What I would tell people is if you're going to grow on a platform, think about what platform makes sense. So when I grew, I chose LinkedIn because I was like, hey, at the time, Instagram, this was 2019. Instagram algorithm changed. It was kind of changing. TikTok was like, I don't even know. That was super early stages. I think probably Musically at that time. And I was like, oh, let me do LinkedIn. Because I was like, on LinkedIn, I was like, it's a desert over here. I'm competing with accountants. It's like, it's easy. So I started doing it. And then I was like, hey, you know what? I help job seekers. Job seekers are on LinkedIn. So I started growing on LinkedIn and I got a lot of clients. I met a lot of people and it still helps me to this day. Then I decided, let me focus on the next platform. Then I started focusing on, I think Clubhouse for a little bit. And I'll tell you, I stopped Clubhouse because I was spending a lot of time and people were like, oh my God, Clubhouse is going to end podcasting. Remember those early days? It was like Clubhouse is going to end podcasting. People are not going to watch YouTube. It was like kind of, this euphoria. And I was like, the big issue with Clubhouse is you don't exist outside the room. Right. So you need to always be in a room, and that's time consuming if you're trying to do work. And I was like, people need to connect with you on Instagram or Twitter. It was like tough to take people off platform. And then I knew Twitter Spaces was coming out. So I was like, you know what? Let me do Twitter because my tweets will help my spaces will help my tweets. So then I did Twitter. I wish I had stopped Twitter earlier. Like I'm at 13K. I wish I had stopped at like 6 to 7. And I wish I had focused on TikTok.
Really?
Because the big thing is Twitter kind of switched as a platform. Like when Elon took it over, he like changes his mind every day of what he wants, and it became a lot more. Twitter was always toxic. Like you had to stay in your guard, but there was an area. Like I ended up on Black Tech Twitter that was really good in the tech Twitter side of things. People were pretty helpful, but then eventually once Elon took it over, it just algorithm change and all that. So I wish I had focused on TikTok, because had I spent that energy on TikTok, I would have had like maybe 20, 30, 40, 50K plus followers, because my friends are all at like 200K to like 800K followers. And I was spending that time on Twitter. I should have focused on that time on TikTok, because then I would have got brand deals. Then I would have been able, and then I could have focused on growing IG Reels and all that stuff. So look, it's always like you're always testing things. You're not always going to hit it right. But thankfully, LinkedIn still pays off to this day.
LinkedIn, let me tell you, on my media kit, when I'm sending out to sponsors, LinkedIn is by far my most expensive media placement for an ad, because it's the strongest. First of all, it's our network that we've spent years building real life relationships. It's the most valuable audience for me that I have. So people, like to ignore LinkedIn, and then when they lose their job, they start getting active. So I'm glad that LinkedIn worked well for you.
The other thing people don't realize about LinkedIn is LinkedIn, compared to other places, is a landing page. Whereas the other one, they kind of see your profile, they see a link in bio, but LinkedIn, they see banner, they see a headline, they see mutual connections, they see an about me. And at the bottom of my LinkedIn profile, I passed 300 testimonials. So the beauty is, it's like that really helps. Whereas like Twitter is like, you could be, they see followers, but you could be anybody, right? Kind of thing. Whereas LinkedIn, there's that added layer of credibility.
Right. It's like, who are the people who are following? Are they bots, or are they actually real people? No, incredibly valuable platform. How has TikTok been going for you?
TikTok is great, like it's cool that we reconnected on TikTok. I always see your stuff, so it's cool. TikTok is a fun crowd. I will say that I just gotta get consistent. Like if I didn't have to worry about money, I would spend 3 months just 10 hours a day on TikTok. Like my friend did that, and he grew like from 10K to 90K in 2 months. So TikTok is one of those things that I really got to bite down, because like there are accounts, like I know they're a friendly account, degree free. So they do similar in my niche, and they're at 450K. So I have like career friends, the WorkCap, my there's an account called WorkCap. He has like 700K. So he's my friend.
I follow him.
So he's my friend. Let me tell you, he's my friend. I knew him from we're still on LinkedIn, and what's crazy? He follows I have another Instagram account that I just started. I have like 30 followers, and he follows and supports me. So he's, it's cool that when you meet people, you see them grow, and they're still the same good people that you met. Whereas some people just become divas.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And it's interesting, because I feel like sometimes once people get to a point of success, they have all sorts of people in their DMs, like just wanting to get something for them. So on some level, I understand having boundaries, but if you have a real relationship with someone and then ghost after you get famous, like that's just not cool.
Yeah. I've seen that happen, where it's like people, they don't respond the same way. Thankfully, I think when you keep on networking, you start getting a feel for who's real and who's not. It's just like the sense you develop because you interact with and you've seen so many things happen. So just realize that, like, I have a lot of friends who are, several 100K followers, but I knew them well before they ever hit their 10K mark. So just realize that a lot of time people will be guarded, because let me tell you, like, as I've grown, like, everybody wants to be my friend, and I know what they want. They want a free resume. And it's like, look, for my internal crew, people who've been there for me, cool, I'll be there. But, we have limited time, limited money, and it's like we have to be strategic with our time. So just realize that, build that network, and it takes years, because again, people don't blow up overnight. But if you're there and you're supporting them along the way, you'd be surprised that how many of them still keep in touch.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Clubhouse by far has been the strongest social community that I like. But my hairstylist I met on Clubhouse. Like, I've been going to her for years. Like, I mean, the way Clubhouse runs deep, it's insane. So Jonaed, do you have any final takeaways? Anything that you would like the listeners to know? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah. So what I would say is focus on the long term. I think so much of social media is like, hey, how I broke into tech in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And it's like, look, maybe there are some stories out there. Like there are always stories, but it's like there are stories of people winning lotto tickets. I'm not gonna be like, hey, go to the lotto. Here's my formula. Go to this deli between 8 to 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Focus on the long term. Focus on upskilling. Focus on building actual relationships. Focus on learning, and you'll see that you keep doing there. And there's a concept called skill stacking, where it's like you keep on learning different skills. And then once you combine all those skills, that's when the money goes up. Because if you I do so many resumes for people. And what I see is like people will make some money. Maybe they'll make 50K, 100K, 100K, 150K. And then all of a sudden they jump up. But it's because of all their years of experience, all their skills, their network, everything comes together. So just realize that it takes time for everything to come together, but it does pay off. Like I've seen people get jumps of 200, 300, 400, 500K in a short amount of time, but it took them 10 years to get to that point. It took them 20 years to get to that point. And absolutely. I want to plug in the No Degree podcast. So if anybody wants to check it out, I have over 200 episodes where I've interviewed a lot of people from all different types of backgrounds and, Amazon employees, Microsoft, Google, all the fun stuff.
Amazing. Love your message. It takes 10 years for an overnight success. People tell us that all the time, but you put it so eloquently. And No Degree podcast, definitely go check it out and listen. Jonaed, thank you so much. This was so serendipitous. Like, thanks for popping in my live and showing support. I really appreciate it. You've been incredibly supportive and happy to give it right back. So yeah, we'll be in touch, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye.